First off, I want to thank the brave men and women who work behind the wall. I want to thank them on a national level because their job goes unrecognized.
How do they try to turn a guard?
Well, correctional officer. Sorry, I apologize. But correctional officer.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion. My boy Giuseppe Fazari did a great movie, a documentary you can actually find on Amazon Prime. So guys, when you get a chance, after you watch this, please don't forget to check Amazon Prime. It's a documentary called Why They Kill. It basically gets into the mind of some of the most scariest individuals and kind of tries its best to give an explanation as to why they do what they do. It's actually modeled off a book called the same, Why They Kill. And we're going to kind of go on a journey with Giuseppe today. He's going to kind of tell us, you know, what made him want to do this type of documentary, maybe even enlighten us on how a documentary like this made it to Amazon Prime. I think that's a pretty cool part of the journey. Now, of course, who do we have with us? None other than the famous author of The Cage Was... Oh, Connie, you're famous now, Connie. You're famous. The Cage Was Her Cocoon. What's up, Connie?
Oh, my goodness. Hi, everybody. Connie Alleyne here. I'm the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall and the author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon. When Anthony told me about this today, I was like, we're going to talk to who about what? Like, I mean, I remember like talking to guys who were in for murder. And I think I probably just wasn't bright enough to understand the danger I was putting myself in by interviewing with them. But I think it's just understanding like, wow, like this is really, I look forward to the insights. This is going to be great.
Yeah, I think for us, it tends to blend after a while, but sometimes you really, I think you're right, Connie. I think sometimes you really have to step back and say, what did this person really do that I talk to every day? So I think it's going to be a great dialogue. And guys, just a little bit about Giuseppe Fazari. He's always been a supporter of Tier Talk, supporter of the corrections profession. He's going to introduce himself better than I could. I know he's a college professor, but this is a passion of his. And what I like about this is that when someone has a passion and they succeed, I think we need to share those stories because, you know, we all need a little success. We all need that little hope. That means that if Giuseppe could do it, we all could do it. But again, Giuseppe, thanks for always, you know, standing by Tier Talk, you know, standing by the profession of corrections. And it's an honor, obviously, to have you on the channel today. Giuseppe, do you mind introducing yourself a little bit?
Sure, Anthony and Connie, thank you so much. It's a pleasure. And, you know, I'm going to preface all this by saying, you know, first and foremost, acknowledging the great men and women of the corrections field, obviously first responders on the line, you know, keeping the profession in order and, you know, keeping society in order. So, you know, just an acknowledgement, and it's you said you're honored. Frankly, it's an honor of mine, frankly, and a great privilege as far as I'm concerned to be here and talk about the documentary and how it came about and the kind of, you know, trajectory that it's been on for the last couple of years. It's given me great pleasure, honestly, unexpectedly, quite serendipitous, actually. And so, but my background is I'm a full-time faculty member at Seton Hall in their criminal justice program. I've been there for a few years now. I love it. And but prior to that, my background is really in court administration. So when we talk about the criminal justice system, as I described for my students, is sort of like that three-legged stool where you have law enforcement, then you have the courts, and then you have the esteemed members of your profession, corrections, making up, you know, right together, it makes up what is the criminal justice field. So I'm most of my experience is in that middle area, is in courts. And so I spent a career in court management. I do a lot of work currently domestically, internationally, consulting in court management as well. And just full-time faculty member. This documentary came about really as a labor of love, frankly. That took many, many years. I'll get into it a little bit later in terms of how it came, sort of how I was inspired to make it. But frankly, there are two real sources of it. The first source is really from my experience, personal experiences of having grown up in Jersey City. And then just as I studied, I've been in the field of criminal justice my whole life, my entire career. And just, you know, from the experiences of working and managing in the courts for as long as I have. Really, that was really kind of the genesis of my thinking, my background, and everything that kind of drove the project.
Well, first off, it's an honor to have you. And the way you opened up and compliment us in the profession, we could talk about knitting today. It just doesn't matter because you're so love to the profession. But I'm very interested in this dialogue as well. Me and Connie were talking, and we were definitely talking about, we want to find out what motivated you to do a documentary like this. What was so special about that book? And then again, to devote the resources that you had to devote to make sure that this was a success. So we have a lot to cover when we come back from our sponsors. Now, guys, if you haven't, before we go to our sponsors, guys, when we come back from the sponsor, I'm going to show you the trailer of Why They Kill. And then after the trailer is done, we're going to go right back into the interview and give you a little breakdown and maybe discover some of the motivations behind Why They Kill. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tear Talks to you, brave men and women at work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor. When we come back, watch the trailer. After the trailer, the dialogue. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
We review about 4,500 cases a year. We have about 1,200 autopsies a year, and about 170 of them are homicide.
Violence, the will of some to torture, beat, and kill, has plagued man since the beginning of time.
Walking around in the library, going from shelf to shelf, and came across Lonnie's book and was fascinated and pulled it down and took it home and read it and immediately thought, why doesn't anyone know about this?
For academics, it's a threat many times to existing theories, the status quo, and I think it directly challenges some of the major assumptions of some of the contemporary theories.
Why do some men, women, and even children assault, batter, rape, mutilate, and murder?
You can look in their eyes and you can just see a coldness and a certain distance that puts a chill in me.
What in their life resulted in that kind of behavior and that kind of personality? He was able to explain that in a way that anybody can relate to because it's based on personal experiences.
The first-hand experience came from actually my life. So I wasn't a colonialist.
Lonnie solved a puzzle that has plagued human life back through recorded history. How does someone become violent?
Got scared.
Didn't matter to me. What mother would want her daughter to suffer like that?
I was ready to kill people.
All right, guys. So that was the trailer. Very interesting. Again, it is available on Amazon Prime. So real quick, and I'll go first, and Connie, I'm sure we're going to kind of go question for question. So I'll go first, then you answer, then I will be quiet so Connie can ask a question, you answer, and then we'll kind of go back and forth. But my first question actually is, first of all, how did you discover the book? And that's the book that you used to model the documentary. How did you discover it?
Right. So the book, it's based on a book by the Pulitzer Prize winning author Richard Rhodes, and the book is by the same title, Why They Kill, and the subtitle is The Discoveries of a Maverick Criminologist. And that criminologist is Dr. Lonnie Athens. He's a colleague of mine, incidentally, now at Seton Hall. He's a full-time faculty member as well there. He's a professor there. He's been a professor there for many, many years. So the full story is, once upon a time, many, many, many years ago, I was a student of Dr. Athens. So I became sort of familiar with his theory when I was just a lowly little undergraduate studying for the first time criminal justice. And so that was my first exposure. So I've been familiar with the theory that is discussed in the book and is the premise of the film. It's called Violentization. So I was already kind of familiar with his theory. And when I first got exposed to it and learned about it was as an undergraduate. And it kind of resonated with me right away, having basically no academic background and no real world kind of experiences as a practitioner in the criminal justice field. But it resonated with me because of my personal experiences having grown up in Jersey City. And so I kind of always had it like in the back of my mind when I eventually wound up in the courts and, had that kind of exposure as a practitioner. And so fast forward a number of years, and 1999, Richard Rhodes winds up, it's discussed in the film a little bit, he comes across Dr. Athens's book, The Creation of Dangerous Violent Criminals, and he winds up being very intrigued by it and resonates with him as well. And he winds up writing a book about Dr. Athens's life as well as his theory, and it becomes a subject. This book winds up doing extraordinarily well. I think it's still in printing. It's like in its 12th commercial printing, and it's done very well domestically as well as internationally. It's been translated into a few languages, so it has been commercially. The book has done very, very well. So I met Richard Rhodes in January of 2000. So more than 20 years ago. And I met him at a talk at Seton Hall when the book first got released and published. And so I met him there, and we went out afterwards, and we went out for dinner. We had some drinks, we were talking, and that was really sort of the end of it all. He had given me, I had gotten a copy of the book at that point, but at that point I was studying for my doctorate. And so at that stage of my life, I wasn't reading anything unless it was assigned. So I took the book, his signed copy of that book, and it went onto my bookshelf in my apartment in Jersey City. And it sat there for years. And 10 years later, in 2010, I've done a lot of work with the federal judiciary out of Nigeria. And it was my first trip overseas to Nigeria when I was doing a major consulting project there. And my wife at the time was reading a book called Discipline Without Spanking. We had 2 4-year-old twins, and she was reading this book. And in the book, Dr. Athens was quoted. And she, as I'm packing for my trip, she said to me, "Oh, Dr. Athens is quoted in this book that I'm reading." I'm saying, "What's the citation?" And she looks at the citation. She said, "It's actually Richard Rhodes, Why They Kill." And then it hit me. I said, I have that book still, and I never wound up reading it. And so I said, this is the perfect trip to pick up and start reading it. And so I wound up reading it on that trip. And it kind of just, when a light bulb went off at that point, when I, by the time, because I read the book on the way there, on the way back, I was done with it. And a sort of light bulb went off that I was going to take that theory of it as Rhodes discussed it in that book and just basically move it into a different medium to make it, give it greater accessibility.
Sorry. So now that, just fast forward, so what does that do to you after your trip? You're reading this book on the trip. Was it en route? Was it because I'm just thinking, I've not read the book, so I don't know how heavy it is or how thought-provoking it is, but I could imagine if it's something that's really going to draw you in, that, you may be working through whatever it is that you read during the time.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Connie. So what I found, I was already familiar with the theory and, the academic literature surrounding the theory. And so what I thought Richard done, I thought what he did and what was done by writing that book is he actually took what would otherwise be very esoteric material, right? Very sort of academic, rigorous kind of information that a scholar would be familiar with, and he kind of broke it down and made it more accessible. So if you read the book, it almost reads like a novel. So any layperson can basically pick up the book and read it with a clear comprehension, frankly. And so that's when it kind of hit me when I read the book, and I said, he's made the material so accessible, so easily understandable to anyone. And so at that point I said, this would make an excellent documentary, is to make a documentary that's centered on Dr. Athens' theory of violentization, to kind of expose it so that everybody could kind of get an understanding of what Richard is trying to convey in his book. So that was the idea of it. That's kind of how it dawned on me, actually, is that he took something that basically made it a lot easier for people to understand, I found.
Now, real quick about the theory, you're talking about theory of violentization.
Right.
Just for some people that aren't aware of his work, what is that theory?
So it basically talks about how a person can go from essentially a benign, individual, a human being, and basically go through a series of stages, 4 stages in particular that we discuss in the film, to ultimately becoming this ultra violent criminal, a person who can go out and basically kill you, or, assault you, rape you, do some serious bodily harm to you without really thinking much about it at the end of the day. So the theory of violentization, it's almost like a play on word in terms of like socialization, violentization. So it's this process of violentizing the individual, and that person has to go through these successive kind of stages in order to get to this point of what is referred to as an ultra violent criminal. So he breaks it down very neatly, and that's why you see the cover of the film shows 4 doors. So in terms of how I visualized it, I kind of looked at each stage almost as like separate rooms. And so you have to go into one room and exit the room to go into another room before you get to that point of really getting to be this ultra violent person.
So, as I'm thinking about this, I'm actually thinking about our correctional environment, right? We know that there's lots of violence in corrections. And so do you feel that these 4 stages can sort of be happening behind the wall and sort of, I don't want to say grooming, but there are people possibly going through these 4 stages as they're currently incarcerated, depending on, where they are and what that looks, the environment they're in?
Indeed, they can be. Prisons could be institutions which basically can exacerbate, a person who has, a person who's going through this process. It could exacerbate it, certainly. Absolutely. I think that's why, when Anthony first approached me about this, I said, it's absolutely relatable to what, the fine men and women do in corrections. And I think, for the folks in the field, I think it'll hit many of those salient points with them as well. Now, that's not to say that every single institution is going to have that type of impact on the inmate. It depends on the institution. I mean, how well managed is it? What's the exposure? What's the tolerant quotient in terms of violence, and how is that institution being managed, right? And so certainly it's something that the warden or the administrator is going to have to be cognizant of. I mean, working in the courts, most of my experience has been in those 2 other areas of correction. So as you know, in New Jersey, probation falls under the purview of the courts, right? So, my area in terms of corrections has been having oversight and purview over probation, as well as then having collaboration and, stakeholder consultation with the folks who are managing, the county jail. So And I know I've had collaboration and conversation with those folks about the kind of experiences they have and how they mitigate some of the risk that inevitably such an environment could have, right? So yes, to answer your question.
Right. I think what's also good about a documentary like this, guys, and the reason why it's good that it gets released on such a platform like Amazon Prime is I still feel that people don't understand the dangerous people that are behind the wall. I think that once they commit their crimes and, you know, they're finally arrested and they're brought behind the wall, people forget about them. People forget that they exist, but they exist. They're still there, and we're dealing with them every day. But unfortunately, because the crime isn't as immediate, or, you know, again, maybe the person's gotten older or whatever it is, sometimes it's their nature to kill. You know, sometimes it doesn't matter. Maybe they won't age out of it. And I think a good thing about this documentary is it kind of showcases, you know, some of the evil that does lurk behind the wall. And then it kind of emphasizes the courage of the people that are overseeing these individuals. Would you agree with that, Joe?
I would. And so here's the other, you know, just to piggyback on that point is, you know, where you have, you know, 2.5 million people nationally that are in correctional institutions at the prison point. You know, you have 7 million people in the country that fall under the umbrella of corrections, with 2.5 million or so approximately that are in prisons. The important piece to understand is, as obviously you folks know, is that 90+% of those individuals at one point or another are going to get out. You know, they're not going to be there forever, right? And so at one point or another, they're going to get out. And so therefore, it's quite incredibly important to ensure that you're not making a situation that is bad worse, you know, in terms of correcting, right? Corrections is to therefore rehabilitate, reintegrate that person. And so I think the theory of violentization, I think Dr. Athens' theory really speaks to, you know, some of the issues that could be honed in on by corrections to make it better, to correct those folks so they can go out and be these law-abiding, productive citizens that we all want them to be. So there is a focus. In the film, I talk about it in this last segment, because I wasn't just going to talk about all these bad, terrible things and then kind of just leave the viewers like, okay, now what? Well, we talk about it in terms of what can we do at this point now? What are some of the preventative types of things that we can do? So we speak to that in the last segment. And I think the prevention piece really gets into corrections in terms of reentry programs and the kind of things that they can do in terms of criminal justice policy in that realm of the field. And just to backtrack, you know, one bit, when I came back from that trip, from that trip in Nigeria, and deciding that, hey, look, I'm gonna see if you know, I can in fact make this film. And Richard Rhodes, I'm thankful to him. I'm thankful to Dr. Athens. I'm thankful to, you know, frankly, you know, I'm the person who kind of put it together, but I had the support of so many. So, you know, financially and otherwise, in terms of who supported ultimately to make the project and turn it into a reality. I wanted to kind of test the theory myself, right? So Dr. Athens came up with the theory after interviewing scores of violent criminals. And so what I did was, I kind of already knew just through my personal experiences, as well as through my professional experience, the theory kind of resonated with me, as I mentioned, but I wanted to kind of test it myself in a similar kind of way that he did. And so I had a close friend and colleague of mine who worked for a correctional institution, a prison out in Newtown, Connecticut. So at the time I was working in New Jersey, so I wanted to go to a different institution out of the state. And so I got permission by the warden there, and, you know, through my contact, and I did I made a couple of trips out to that institution, and I wound up interviewing in much the same kind of way that Dr. Athens did, asking some questions about their background and talking to them about their crimes, and kind of seeing how it fit within these 4 stages. And it was just an incredible and very insightful experience. These are folks that, you know, they weren't, now mind you, these are folks that had already been convicted. They weren't appealing their case. They were there, they were going to, and they, you know, they were convicted of doing, you know, some, you know, pretty terrible things. And, you know, I kind of spoke to them and talked to them about their background, their experiences, you know, and basically how they got to where they are, essentially. And so I made up my mind after, having those conversations that I really, I was going to make the film at that point. So it kind of had that kind of impact on me.
Connie, can I ask something real quick before? Is that all right? I want to ask them. So you said stages. So the 4 doors. So are these progressive stages? When you talk about prevention, at what point would it be too late? Like at what point during these 4 stages that someone goes through where you have to realize that this person could be a lost cause? Sad to say, but could that happen?
I guess, there's aberrations in everything, I guess. I mean, I'm not so much of a cynic though, Anthony, right? I don't think anything's ever a lost cause, even though it may be. But I think when you look and understand those stages, I think the earlier, the better, right? So when you're at the point of brutalization, when you get to the point of belligerency, some people sort of age out on their own, right? Because, to commit a violent act also creates a vulnerability, right? Because you're putting yourself in a position where you could be attacked violently as well, right? So there's a kind of hurdle that you have to get over in order to commit such an act as well. And so the earlier the better. Frankly, if you understand this, I'm sure, but if you worked in the courts for as long as I have, and you have an understanding of the court system, of the criminal justice system, I think, and for the practitioners that have worked in the system, I think most of us would concur that the criminal justice system, the origin of it, the origin of the crime actually doesn't happen. You're not seeing it for the first time, frankly, in the criminal justice system. I think you're seeing it in the juvenile justice system. I think you're seeing it in the family court, right? In the domestic relations and domestic violence and the abuse and neglect, in the juvenile delinquency, in the truancy cases, in the low-level drug offenses, right? I think you're seeing it in the school expulsion cases. I think you're seeing it there, right? Before you come and see this person as an adult, right? There are scores of cases when I was working in Essex County that we had folks in the adult system. When you look at their criminal case histories, right, this guy, has a long history. We met him back, 10 years ago, back in the family court, right? So I think the film, the Richard Rose's novel, Dr. Athens' theory, I think it resonates the most with practitioners because they see the application of it in our day-to-day work. And so I think you'll see that the origin of those terrible acts, you would have probably, we talk about it in the film, the folks that are all the way at the end of the line, right, where they wind up getting institutionalized for doing maybe some really heinous, horrendous thing. When you see them at the very beginning of the process, that person would have garnered sympathy if you saw them as a child and what they went through. And I think that's more of the, and that's not the exception. I think that's more of the rule, frankly. I think that's more of the, do you have this person who's had like a picture perfect life and then really sort of goes off rogue, right? And it's like kind of like this anomaly and ends up in the criminal justice system? Sure, certainly. But I think that's more of the exception. I don't think that's the rule. I think there's a lead up, there's a trajectory that typically follows. And the book and the theory and the film speak to that.
Connie, I think what hit me hard just now too was when he said that as a child, that person would have garnered sympathy. That's powerful.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you made me like think about immediately when you started to kind of break it down was really, it feels like reentry is a little late to intervene in this process. Like when you started talking about juvenile justice, like I'm thinking like how many juveniles that we have that this is probably the beginning stages that we need to be doing something now.
Absolutely.
What are the recommendations like to kind of interject before it even gets much further?
Yeah, so I had conversations with, like kind of the work, like for instance, where I had many years ago, I did a trip out to, if you're probably all familiar with Boys Town out in Omaha, Nebraska, and talk about the kind of the children there that I kind of interacted with, and the administrators there that I spoke to as a part of a, entirely different project, but again, related in terms of what those children did, right? As a result of the experiences and the kind of trauma that they've had, right? The brain keeps score, right? Your brain keeps score. So the criminal at the end of the line is, my feeling is that is the end result of traumatic events and traumatic experiences that leads them and turns them into person that you see before you, right? So it's the same sort of thing as, I don't think people are necessarily a product of their environment. I think, that could be true, but it's more than social location. That's kind of like a shortcut to thinking, I feel. And people are more of a product of their experiences. And that's why you can have two individuals in the same corporal community lined up turn out completely different. I mean, I'm a product, I'm a random immigrant son from Jersey City, impoverished area, riddled with crime when I was growing up. And so the environment is more to just the environment. It's more than just the environment. And so you're right. I think I wouldn't discount reentry though, right? Because you have to do something with the people that are already kind of midstream and at the end of the stream. So reentry's got a place, and it has an important place in policy, in the policy makers' decisions in terms of what they do with the folks that are currently in the system. But if I was, king of the world, I think it's got to be early, right? I think you have to. I think you have to make those impacts early in a child's life when they're impressionable, right? When those kind of experiences, the traumatic ones, really kind of have this sort of indelible print on their mind and on their person. We talk about it in the film, right? We can't guarantee every child a good family, but we certainly have the wherewithal, money and otherwise, to guarantee a good school, to guarantee good mentorship, to guarantee good teachers, good coaches, right? We have the wherewithal to do that. And sometimes that's all it takes, right? That's all it takes.
What's great is that I know with juveniles, a lot of things is the gangs, and what we try to do is we try to prevent. Then eventually, if it's too, they're starting to join, we try to intervene, but if it becomes too late, we suppress. And again, that the last thing of suppression is more out of desperation, right? Because, at this point, there's a threat, and in our world, we do our best to eliminate that threat. And I don't know if it's the same here with the mindset of someone who, may have been, could have been a normal child, but unfortunately, the environment itself pushed the child into, becoming someone that originally, again, what you see in the movie, these people that, for some reason lost their touch with the world. They don't have a level of empathy because in the end, maybe no one had to care for them. So therefore, if I'm seen as an object, well, then to me, people are objects. So therefore, this is how I relate. So I think a big part of that re-entry aspect is to bring value back to how they see humanity. But that goes by how they see themselves first. If they see themselves with the level of value, then maybe they can start to see others. Do you think a lot of people that tend to have this violent streak, outside of the extreme narcissistic, Bundys out there, would you feel that they also have no value for themselves in order for them to do what they do?
Yeah, it's how they see it, how they see the world, right? It's a perspective, right? So it's, if you're, and that's why, think of it almost like a prism, right? And you're standing on one side of the prism and you're looking through that prism and you see the world through those sort of rose-colored kind of that side, right? They're not standing on the same side as your prism, though. They're standing on a different side. So the way they're looking at the same exact thing as you, look at it completely different, right? So if somebody, for instance, I'll give you an easy example. If you're walking, down the street and somebody bumps into you, right? You may not think anything of it. You may actually say, and they bumped into you. You may just simply say, "Excuse me," and go off on your way. Somebody else may completely perceive it differently, and they may actually perceive it as a complete disrespect that you've bumped into them, right? And they may be willing to attack you. They may be willing to die over such a thing. And so it's perspective. It's how they see the world. It's how they see, behavior, and they interpret that behavior, and then they respond to it. And so, that's really to say, like, for instance, the person who goes out and kills somebody else over something that really, a thing of very sort of little material value or what have you, say, "Oh, that person is crazy." Well, to say it's a shortcut to thinking, to dismiss it that way. It's a value judgment, right? Well, it may be crazy to you and may be of little value to you, but that's not how the other person sees it. And so that's really how, we discuss in the film and how you really kind of have to wrap your mind around it. In other words, it's almost like saying, it's where the person is coming from, right? Mm-hmm. Emotionally, mentally, it's where that person is coming from that you can't relate to because you're coming from a different place mentally, not physically.
Hey, Connie, you know what's scary here too, Connie, is that if you don't understand the theory that's brought out in the movie, which, by the way, is very well done, it really explains the theory, very captivating. If you're tend to be an interviewer and you want to, let's just say I just want to go out and interview these serial killers, there's a good chance that you yourself may be affected by the people that you are interviewing. So for those that decide to embark on this, and I don't know if Joe may want to comment on this, but I think a good understanding of the theory must be needed before you decide to start interviewing people with this type of mindset, because you're going to need eventually how to get yourself out, correct?
Right. Well, here's the thing. There was one gentleman in particular that I interviewed, and I had lengthy conversation with in Newtown, in the Newtown facility. And he was there for life, life without parole. He was there for murder. And it was actually a very well-known case in Connecticut. It was in, all the papers, having the conversation with him. And he was actually familiar with Dr. Athens's theory. He actually read his book. He knew about it. And the thing that struck me when I was talking to him, he goes, "I felt as though he was describing my life." That's what he said to me. He goes, he felt as though when he was reading and coming to understand those stages, he felt as though someone was essentially describing his life. And this is a man had committed a real atrocity in terms of, he had murdered a woman, and he was a business owner. And having the conversation with him, and being across the table from him, you would have never thunk it, right? He sounded like a very eloquent businessman, matter of fact, articulate, but at the end of the day, he did some terrible things throughout his life that ultimately ended, in the murder of this woman that he was convicted for, that he was convicted for having killed. And so that one gentleman, it's sort of like, when he said that to me, I said, it's just incredible that, he kind of looked at it and, kind of personalized it. Said, wow, it's almost as though he's speaking about me.
So my one question, I think that's kind of just looming, just like from a researching perspective, so as you were going through this process of researching and preparing and everything for the documentary, were there things that you came across that you felt poked holes in the theory? And if there were, what were those things that you were able to kind of reconcile, probably with further research? But I'm just thinking there's always a time where we're like, well, wait a minute, you question something and then there's some more evidence that kind of pulls you back in. What were those things? Right.
So, sometimes not through my own sort of research. When I was talking to that to that group of inmates in Newtown, nothing in those conversations that I had there kind of made me have any sort of self-doubt. Is like, well, you know, there's aspects that don't kind of ring true here. Sometimes you'll hear things in the media, right? It's like, you know, some person goes off on a rampage, right? And goes on some sort of shooting spree, like, and some mass shooting, and doesn't have any criminal case history, seems to have grown up, you know, with good, loving parents and sort of picture perfect life. Not knowing anything else, right? Just looking at it from that side and say, well, it doesn't seem to sort of fit the model here. So I didn't see it personally, in other words. So in all my time in the courts, when I was in the criminal part, when I was, you know, had oversight of probation, and, you know, we're interviewing, you know, hundreds of individuals who are, you know, convicted at trial or taking a plea, and you're doing a PSI, right? You're doing the pre-sentence investigation report on them, and you're collecting all that background information on them. If you read those PSIs that, you know, when they're initially being interviewed, and you look at their criminal case history, you kind of see the pattern, right? So it's, you know, you're seeing the pattern, it's there. So on the everyday type of case, it kind of substantiated it in my mind. The only kind of doubt that was brought to mind was only on those cases I didn't know anything about, and the media is conveying it as though there was nothing ever wrong with these other individuals, right? That went off and did some of these horrible things. So I'll tell you what I tell what I've told others. The way I see theory, right? I don't really see it in such a black and white way, right? I don't really see it like a math formula, you know, 2 + 2 = 4. I really kind of see it along a spectrum with lots of gray. So, in different shades of gray, I should say. So there are those theories that are less right, and I think there are theories that are more right. So are there exceptions? Are there anomalies? No matter how perfect, quote unquote, a theory may appear, you know, probably, of course, there's exceptions to everything. But I don't think that was ever the point. I think in application, where the kind of philosophical rubber, right, hits the policy road, if you will, when you take a theory and you put it into practice, let me take a look to see how it applies in practice. I think the violentization theory, I think his Dr. Athens' theory is most right, and that's why I made the film about it.
Yeah, like, obviously there will be people, like you said, that would challenge the theory, but having said that, it's the same thing even with the corrections profession, guys. I mean, you know, I wish we had a policy for everything, but we don't. But in the meantime, we try our best to, you know, hopefully cover every situation as best we can. But, you know, as you move forward, what did you want to accomplish with this documentary? What was the end game? What was the purpose?
Well, my first purpose is I always wanted to make a documentary about, you know, sort of like a passion project, and just kind of, play a hand at it. Let me take a look to see if I can do it. And so, like I said, after I'd read Richard Rhodes's book, it kind of light bulb went off, and I said, this is a project that I really could sort of cut my teeth on, and, you know, creatively play around with it to see if I could actually do it. And so in my mind's eye, you know how they say you sort of begin with the end in mind. In my mind's eye, I already kind of knew what the film would look like. I already kind of had an understanding of what the stages, you know, what they sort of symbolized and signified in my mind. So, you know, the end game for the film for me was really to get it done as a labor of love, and to take this material and try to make it more accessible to a mass audience, which I think it's done, you know, particularly on the kind of success now that it's sort of had on Amazon Prime in particular. So the film has done very well. It's been shown in, you know, a dozen different states. It's had, you know, we just embarked on over 100,000 unique and complete views on Amazon Prime. So I'm very happy about that. And then a more sort of broader objective is to try to get it into the discussion of policymakers, into the folks who could really effectuate policy in criminal justice, law enforcement, courts, and corrections, and really show them the applicability of this theory into the day-to-day practice. And we talked about some of that with respect to corrections, the juvenile population in particular, and then I think in the reentry programs. And then in terms of your own internal and external classifications, right? When they leave the courts in New Jersey and they come to, central intake down in Trenton, you guys are doing your own internal and external classifications, right? You're going to see in those classifications, Connie, Anthony, you're going to see in those classifications the kind of trajectory, obviously, that these people are on. It's risk assessment, right? You're going to be able to see, if you plug it into a model, you'll be able to see which stage this person is in. And depending on which stage that person is in, should dictate to you what course of action would need to be taken. And it's kind of the wave of the future as far as I'm concerned, because everything is going to turn into baseball. As I say, the sabermetrics kind of game of criminal justice. You're seeing it in bail reform in New York, in New Jersey in particular, who are pioneers in the country on bail reform. It's all based on risk assessment. You're going to see it in corrections even more. You're going to see it in law enforcement to the extent that they haven't been doing it since, the mid-1990s under Commissioner Bratton in New York, when they used all that crime mapping, right, the hotspot crime. It's been in law enforcement for 3 decades already. And so I think you're going to see that expand more with the burgeoning of technology, with the burgeoning of all these sort of plugins that we're going to have on assessing risk. And I think the theory speaks strictly to risk, because you're going to be able to see where they are on that continuum.
I have one more. Is that all right, Con? Okay. What's good about this, and I think the movie explains too, is we're focused on the why people do what they do, which is obviously very dark. And obviously for those that are going to embark on this form of reentry, what are the things that they need to get themselves right with? I mean, I don't think this is something for just anybody to pick up and do. I mean, this is really going into the dark side of humanity in order to save people and bring people back. So what would what would someone need to do to prepare themselves to enter that world and try to bring people back?
I think that I think the best part of the theory in general, and I think the central part of the film is and as you know, because you've seen it, is the phantom community. And the phantom community that he talks about is kind of a universal type of principle, right? It speaks not to why a person who's an inmate, right, in northern state has committed crime his whole life, right? Why is he doing that particular? But why does the person who's the successful banker get up in the morning and go and be a successful banker? It's a phantom community of why that banker is the banker and the guy in northern state is the guy in northern state. It's the universality of phantom community in terms of why people do what they do. It's the socialization process that they've gone through, and it's the voices in your head that you're constantly having conversations with that basically lead to the types of behavior that people take part in. So that's how I would sort of explain it, or otherwise have the discussion with folks in corrections, right? Is to sort of bear that in mind in terms of what the case manager and the case social worker is doing, and how you're going to address individual inmates within the institution, right? You're not lumping everybody into general pop, right? You're not putting everybody, no, of course not. Why would you do that, right? So it's the same sort of thing, right? You're not doing that because there's different risks, there's different assessment. People are at different levels, they're different stages. You're not doing that because they're at different parts, right? It would be chaos if you put everybody into this. When they first came up with corrections in the United States, they used to put everybody in the same room, male, female, different risks, kids, adults, everybody in the same square room, and it was disastrous, right? So why are we we can't treat everybody the same, right? You have to assess it. It'll do, frankly, the other piece of it is, if you take that perspective, it also kind of not de-escalates, but it could lead to decarceration because, it's the opposite of mass incarceration, basically, right? You're engaging people in a way so that, they can, hopefully you can get to the point where they're disassociating and disaffiliating with that criminal element so that it doesn't turn into this revolving door. They go out and become recidivist again.
So I guess just to shift gears a little bit maybe it's a lighter note or maybe it's not. I'm just wondering. So how did you even go about getting your documentary onto Amazon? I think sometimes people think this is just such a daunting task to, get it to be acknowledged at a much higher level than, maybe doing something online or such. Would you be able to explain that a little bit?
So I think part of it was, kind of blissful ignorance a little bit, right? So I just thinking I'm gonna, it's like I get back from West Africa and I was like, I'm gonna make a documentary. It's like I had no idea, what that involved, the money that it was gonna take, the time. That's why it took me 7 years and lots of time and lots of money to do it, because I really went into it not thinking about what was gonna be involved in doing it. I just had it in my mind I was gonna do it, right? So the same sort of thing happened with the Amazon Prime platform. I had a series of speaking engagements that people wanted to screen the film, and they wanted to have sort of a Q&A, and all of that went away last year. And so when the pandemic hit, I said, wow, this is really terrible. What can we, and I started thinking what can we do? And so, my wife, where all my good ideas always materialize from her, she said, hey, you should take a look to see, maybe Netflix or Amazon or something like that. So, I started talking to the editor of the project, and he said, well, listen, you could try, good luck, because it is really tedious. And I know they're real sticklers in terms of formatting and everything that you need to do. And so I started researching it, and I started talking to other folks that had done it. And so what I did was I had to make a number of different changes. I already had it closed captioned, but they required a specific different type of closed captioning on it. So it was very tedious. So it took me, I decided to do it as soon as the pandemic hit, which was in mid-March. And it took me a few months to kind of go back to the drawing board and sort of reformat it and do sort of different things to it in order to get it up to par. And then they reviewed it, and they had to go through their different channels for approval. And then pleasantly, I said, hey, listen, I won't know if I don't try. And so in June, they came back, they said, we'll take it. And so that was it. And then, so it was, and it's done, it was very slow at first. And, we did what we could to sort of publicize it on Facebook and, getting word out. But now it's kind of like, thankfully, it seems like it's really starting to get a larger and a larger audience. So we're very grateful. And I'm very appreciative, obviously, because, I'm just the person that kind of got it to home base, basically. There are a number of people that, got me to first, second, and third base. So I'm really sort of appreciative. So, it's a really sort of cooperative effort of people coming together and, giving me as much help as they could.
I know you have similar projects en route. I know I won't go too into detail, but you got something that you're working on now. Is there anything that you would do different, or are you pretty much good with the path you've taken so far?
On this first project, I'm very happy with it. I cut my teeth on it, and it was it was an experience, and I'm grateful for it. I learned a great deal. It gave me some, I really feel the best part of it actually was the experience of making it, right? So I met, some great folks that, gave me access, like I said, in Newtown, Connecticut, all the traveling that I've done, talking to different, criminal justice practitioners, folks in corrections, law enforcement, judges, even it's funny now, even if when I do sort of a consultation or I'm giving a seminar in the courts, and, they're looking at my CV or my bio and they see the film, they wind up going online and watching it, right? And so some of the conversation in the path of talking about that consulting that has nothing to do with this documentary. We wind up having some great conversations about their own experiences, personal and professional, and how it kind of, spoke to them. So it's really, listen, I mean, it's not, and I probably should have said this, respectfully, it's not a Martin Scorsese film, right? It's not like Marvel Comics out there. Anthony and Connie, you say it's a heady kind of film. It's not gonna, but again, I didn't have, millions of dollars either as a budget in order to put toward it. So it's kind of like one of those films that, we wanted to kind of, pick at people's intellectual curiosity about what I think is a very kind of important topic. So, other than, just trying to, I'm very happy with it because in terms of, like I said, what I had in my mind's eye ultimately wound up coming to fruition. So I'm very happy. I wouldn't go back, honestly, and change anything with it. I learned a great deal. I learned, a lot about editing and, different shots and different angles and, those types of things, more the technical kind of pieces of filmmaking. It's a real, if anything else, it's confirmed in my mind that it's an art form, undoubtedly, no doubt, and a hard one at that.
Well, I'll tell you something. The key, obviously, is the process. I mean, that's where you learn. I mean, what motivated me as soon as I wrote this book right here, Manipulation Decoded, I was quick to start writing the second one because, how I saw the first one as being successful. I mean, even if it was just one person telling me that this is what they were able to take from it. And I think that's the key. I think you made a tremendous documentary that has a lot to offer to anybody who's interested, but more importantly to the profession here, because again, we're surrounded by individuals that are dangerous. And maybe it's a good idea for us to get a better understanding of the individuals that we deal with, because it gives us a different approach, an approach that may one day save our lives. I mean, that's the key. I mean, for those that work in corrections, the ability to de-escalate, the ability to communicate comes from an understanding of why people are doing or have done what they've done. Now, in closing, Joe, how would
just to piggyback on that in terms of corrections, Anthony, you raise a good point, right? So if I'm a corrections officer, right, and I'm on the line, right, walking the tier day in, day out, right, if I want to change somebody, I got to change their phantom community. And the thing about the phantom community, it's not static, right? It's not static. It changes. As life progresses, the person's phantom community changes. So that's why, for instance, if you take an inmate, a hardened criminal in New Jersey, and you take him and you move him to sunny California, that person is still going to be a hardened criminal. Why? Even though you've changed geographically, you put him in a different place. It's because he takes that phantom community with him, right? Those experiences, in other words, that speak to him, that give him his world's perspective, he's taken them with him. It follows him, right? It's perpetual. It's in that person's head. So you want it, as a corrections officer, I think you guys are in a tremendous position to change that person's phantom community. That's how you change people. You change them through experiences. You change them through that phantom community. And the wonderful thing about it is that it can be done. And the earlier juveniles, right, the better.
Yeah, what people don't realize is that we do have those positive interactions. A lot of people think that all we do is drag our knuckles, but guys, we're a big part of how they see the world outside. So depending on how we carry ourselves is what they could take with them. So I would like to think that we do invest ourselves, because we know eventually, like Joe said, 90% go back into the community. So the last thing we want to do is for someone, behind the wall to commit to all that work to create that change and then to be the antagonist against that. That to me just doesn't, it doesn't fit into the plan of who we are and the role that we play now in corrections in 2021. Hey, Joe, just in closing again. So I'm interested in finding, Why They Kill. I want to watch it. What's the best venues to do that? Is there other ways if I don't have Amazon Prime? How would I be able to connect with this?
So if you have Amazon Prime, it's free. If you have an Amazon Prime account, you go on and you plug it in and you could watch it gratis. If you don't have Amazon Prime, then I think they have a rental they have a rental option or purchase option that Jeff Bezos is going to make, more billions of dollars on. So, so there's a rental portion, there's a rental piece there. There's a purchase option there as well. But if you have Amazon Prime, like I said, it's gratis. I mean, you can just go online and watch it. Or listen, if you're one of these folks that still has a DVD player, you could email me, and then I could send you a copy of the DVD. I have some of those stored away still. We give them away. We give them away during screenings.
Joe, what's your email?
So FazariGM@iCloud.com.
All right, and that's Fazari, Fazari.
Correct.
All right, now
GM@iCloud.com.
Can you say that one more time? I may have stepped on you. Can you say that one more time?
Sure. So Fazari, same as my last name, GM@iCloud.com.
All right. So this was a good discussion again. Well, Connie, what was your thoughts on? Well, first off, Joe, do you have any closing thoughts? Just end the discussion. Anything you want to say to our audience?
Listen, I'm just going to reiterate what how I started off. A great honor and an appreciation for welcoming to here on their program, and again, an acknowledgement to the fine men and women who work in corrections as great professionals, and being right there in the first line, particularly a year like no other, right? Incredible. So thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, it was an honor having you. And Connie, you have any closing thoughts? I mean, this was interesting.
Yeah, this was very interesting. I just want to say thank you. I mean, thank you for just bringing forth the theory. I mean, it wasn't one that I was particularly familiar with. But as we were talking, I looked it up. I was like, oh, you read about this. So it was one of those moments. But I really just do appreciate this being one of those learning sessions almost. I think we're always talking with the audience and trying to make sure we connect with them and we can relate it back to, our profession. And I feel like this one was just so easy to relate. So I appreciate you being on and us having this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, what I loved about it, again, sometimes we don't realize what we're curious about until someone brings something to our attention. They're like, hey, you know what? I have a little interest in that. So you never know. You may have someone who may have thought of doing this, and then now they see that you have accomplished it, and you never know. Maybe you have a future interviewer in route. But guys, the key here is this, though, is that in the end, we provide stuff that you can learn. So I think this is another perspective. Again, you got the movie, you got the book, but it's great to keep that knowledge going, because the more you know about the people that are next to you, I like to believe the safer you can be. I mean, for me, I've always kept on reading. And here's something that Joe mentioned earlier that I want you guys to just take wind of, because it's important to me. So Joe mentioned that one of the gentlemen that he saw, I think it was in Newton, Connecticut, had read the book, Why They Kill. That means these inmates are constantly educating themselves. So we don't want to fall behind in that. That means if you see a popular book being read by the compound, and trust me, we'll try to ban it, but if that doesn't work, read it. That's how I started reading 48 Laws of Power, because the inmates were reading it. And at the time it wasn't banned. I said, well, you know what? I'm going to have to read it, because obviously it's that important for all the inmates to read it. I need to know how that can be used against me. So even, Why They Kill, it's good to get an understanding of the people that are next to you, because again, you never know when your service could save a life, because you were the one that read that book, that got an understanding, because that inmate said, this book is my life. So imagine that tool for you now. Look at the tool that book or that movie now can provide you when dealing with another inmate that may have those same circumstances that kind of, push to violent acts. And here you are. I read this book. Hey, Sarge, let me get a shot at this guy. Let me try something. You just never know.
Anthony, what what I would challenge, all, the men and women in corrections, is that I think if you read the book and you familiarize yourself with Dr. Athens' theory, and that particular concept that I centered the film on, the fandom community, I think that not only are you going to learn something about the folks that you're around day in and day out, you're going to find and learn something about yourself, because the fandom community is in all of us. Your fandom community speaks to you, and my fandom community speaks to me. It is who I am, right? I become by way of my experiences. And so that you're going to learn something about yourself, about your own behaviors and how they've been guided by experiences, and who's at the center, who's placed center stage in your fandom community. So your corrections professionals, if nothing else, right? But certainly they're going to learn about the folks that they're around. You're going to learn something about yourself as well. I guarantee it.
Yeah, the fandom community is something I'm actually very intrigued in now. Maybe me and Connie can devote a topic on that and have you come back on, Joe.
Absolutely. I'm happy to.
Yeah. Now, as always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post up a video. Stay safe.